said earlier that the One Sky program, that it's a huge program. It's $600+ million. Yep. It's going to cost $1.6 billion over the life of the project.
Yep.
Are you saying that One Sky has some inherent problems in it?
Yes, because it's being purchased for the existing air traffic control system, and the way they have the sectors set up is they've got the sectors which air traffic controllers control aircraft on. If you explain, there are vertical lines in the sky, and as you're flying along, an air traffic controller, one can't do the whole of Australia. So they divide it up into sectors. But for historical reasons, because we used to have flight service below, they've put a horizontal boundary in the sectors, and the sectors are very large. Whereas if you were going to put controlled airspace at these airports, and I wouldn't suggest every airport, which is the US system, because our pilots are experts at self-separating, and at places like Birdsville, where you have no mountains and only one instrument plane a day, you obviously can't run into a mountain or anybody, and so you probably don't need air traffic control. But a place like Lockhart River, where we killed 15 people, 15 people were killed there because the pilot, 2 professional pilots, simply descended too early on the approach. If there'd been an ADS-B transceiver nearby and that had been class Echo controlled airspace, the alarm system would have gone off in the air traffic control tower and the pilot would have been told to immediately climb. We possibly would have saved 15 lives.
But we wouldn't have had that back in that time, would we?
No, but if it happened tomorrow, the same thing will happen.
Yeah.
In other words,
talking about that accident there when I went into the hill in Queensland, things have changed since then. It's hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. And what I'm saying is that, if I can just quickly finish the discussion about the ADS-B, the problem here is, and I've put in my submission, I'm not an expert at reading regulatory impact statements because they're so complicated, but I've had some experts look at it and they've said, Dick, rather than general aviation getting a benefit out of the ADS-B mandate, which is coming in fact, it's going to give them a net position of minus $62.2 million. That because to fit all of these, every aeroplane that flies in cloud with one of these units, which if you're in uncontrolled airspace, it doesn't actually give you any safety system anyway, that's the type of money. Now, that will completely destroy our general aviation industry. If I can just mention one other thing, which is really serious, and I notice you're asking questions.
So, Mr. Smith,
yep.
I'm just a broken down shearer, and I've been in a few planes, I've never flown one.
Yep.
Are you saying the ADS-B is far too expensive and will stop people flying the small planes?
I'm saying that it's not necessary for small planes that fly in uncontrolled airspace. Right. And so we're bringing it in, we started to bring it in 5 years ahead of the USA, but what's more to the point, in 2020, when the US mandate comes in, below 10,000 feet in E and G airspace, E is the controlled airspace, there is no requirement in the USA. They've said, well, it would destroy our industry, and they're one of the wealthiest countries on earth, so they don't even have a requirement coming in. But in 18 months' time, we have this requirement, and already Aminta Hennessy, who operates a fantastic flying school at Bankstown, they've gone and mortgaged their house to pay for the extra equipment to go in these aircraft. And the thing I find extraordinary is if air services had added some extra controlled airspace, you'd say, oh, well, at least, at Bathurst, you're going to give us a control service. But what they've done is said, we might have to train our controllers, that will cost money, or we might have to get some more controllers, that will cost money. So we won't do that, but we will support the early introduction of ADS-B. And when they brought in the first requirement, which came in about 15 months ago, John McCormack, the head of CASA, had told me, I said, look, this is going to damage the business aviation community. Many of them will go broke because the costs to put ADS-B in a small business aviation aircraft is something like $150,000. And the reason it's $150,000 is that the American mandate doesn't come in until 2020, so we are actually doing the design for America. And so John McCormack came back and said, don't worry, there'll be a dispensation. I've spoken to everyone, and just as there was a dispensation for the very accurate altimeters called RVSM, there will be a dispensation to allow aircraft to fly in it. As well as telling me verbally, he wrote to Brad Edwards and and confirmed that in writing, and he's also spoken to me in the last couple of weeks and confirmed it once again. But when he got in touch with Air Services, even though CASA is the safety regulator, Air Services said, no, we won't allow it. But then he said, well, how come you've allowed the military? Because the military have King Airs, which business aviation have, and they have Orions, and they said, oh, it'll cost us a lot of money to fit ADS-B. And that's taxpayers' money. And so immediately they've been given a dispensation to fly above 29,000 feet anywhere across Australia.
So Defence is a different rule for Air Force aircraft?
Defence at this moment, because I presume of the mates network with Defence running CASA and Air Services. And so this is the fact.
Just pausing there for a moment,
Yep.
Dick. Before I ask you how many hours you got on your Caravan now, I remember flying in it when it was brand spanker.
Yep.
I actually have to leave for another appointment. We are most grateful for your attendance. We're going to 8 o'clock. Yep. Senator Williams is going to chair in my absence, and I hope everything goes to... You're in good hands.
Try and control them, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, the military have been given a dispensation and have one now, and the airlines have been given a dispensation for flying up to 3 days with the equipment faulty. Now, let me explain to you the particular mandate that came in 18 months ago, 5 years ahead of America, says if you fly an aircraft above 29,000 feet across Australia, you have to have ADS-B. And that's because Air Services have fitted stations across Australia that will work above 29,000 feet. There's not many of them because it's line of sight, and so there might be one at Birdsville, one at Bourke. And the amazing thing is, CASA said to Air Services, well, can't you just procedurally separate the plane which doesn't have ADS-B, which is the system we've used for 50 years, and it's the system used below 29,000 feet where ADS-B is not required. But they refused to do that. And it was the most extraordinary situation.
Well, Mr. Smith, on that very important issue, who has the call, CASA or Air Services? Who's the boss in this relationship?
CASA is the boss, but if Air Services said it's not safe, what does CASA do? So what Air Services have said is, oh no, it's not safe for us to use procedural separation. And by the way, on the understanding would be, because you're going to mix aircraft with ADS-B and aircraft without, the aircraft without ADS-B might have to have a delay. In other words, let's say it's flying at 43,000 feet over Longreach, it wants to descend, and there's an aircraft with ADS-B nearby. The air traffic controller might have to say to the plane without ADS-B, I have to procedurally separate you, which is a bigger separation standard. I think it's 10 minutes, which is quite a distance. You'll have to delay, or you might have to turn right for 3 minutes before you can descend. The very fact that military aircraft are flying there and that airline aircraft are flying there without ADS-B shows that it's possible. But in an act of what I would call just sheer bastardry, Air Services said we're not going to allow that. And it's something that I've seen of recent times where they're completely orientated to the airlines. It's where they get, they mentioned 80% today, but I would say 90% of Air Services income comes from the airlines. And general aviation they consider a nuisance. And in fact, at meetings, I've heard them say this to people, look, you're lucky we allow you in the system at all. You don't even pay your own way, because the amount of workload to Air Services for a small plane flying instrument flight rule compared to a large plane, the small plane is actually extra workload because it takes longer to get somewhere, but the large plane with 200 passengers in it is giving Air Services 100 times more income. And what's happened, I don't think it's intentional by the people at Air Services, but as they've become more isolated from the reality of the industry, is that general aviation gets more and more damaged, and people sell their planes, they close their charter operations, and they move and fly with the airlines, which is great for the airlines. But it's absolutely disastrous for Australia, because we are going to lose a complete industry that we need. At Bankstown Airport, I used to have 3 companies that could service my aircraft. Now there's 1, and so the charges are just sky high. The places that used to have fuel don't have fuel anymore. And so we've got a major catastrophe happening here with general aviation. And you've got to say as a country, well, do you want to wipe out that industry, not have it at all. And I think that would be a terrible mistake. It can employ tens of thousands of people. We could be leaders of the world in flight training. But the way we're going, this enormous damage is being done. If this regulatory impact statement, and I implore you, I don't know what powers you have, just to ask ASA, hey, redo it properly. Redo it properly. And by the way, what it implies, and Senator Xenophon, you covered this point, is a regulatory impact statement is supposed to show the winners and the losers. But it just shows the winners and implies that the losers are winners.
That's misleading.
It's completely misleading. And even when this has been pointed out, they basically don't answer the question. In other words, the Civil Aviation Safety has obviously decided, look, that was done in 2009. It would be embarrassing to relook at it. And the latest thing I've heard is they're planning to give dispensations. And so this is a ridiculous way to regulate, where you have a requirement that all these small operators, some of them are mortgaging houses, some of them fitting the equipment now, and then you're telling people, but oh, don't worry, in 18 months' time, when it's going to be mandated, we'll give you a dispensation, if you're lucky.
Yes,
It's just not the fair way.
The Air Force has got a dispensation.
The Air Force has a dispensation, does not require to fit the equipment in things like King Airs and Orions and any of the planes that are expensive for them to fit.
It's a bit of a double standard there.
Well, it's outrageous. It's just absolutely outrageous, but it's who's got the power and who's weak. And it's very un-Australian. It's not fair. Doesn't affect me in the slightest. I can afford any of this equipment. But I see an industry being destroyed. And by the way, if I can just add